In Northeast Arkansas, tons of Church of Christ. Anytime we talk about church history, they want to distance themselves from that. So with us being Reformed Baptists, we understand sola scriptura. Scripture is the ultimate authority.
Right.
But Christ has been building his church for 2,000 years. It's to our benefit to study what the saints of old have been revealing. So we understand the value of church history.
So I guess today we're going to talk about church history. Let's get into it. These are a couple guys named Jeremiah Nortier and Trey Fisher. They're on this podcast called Cultish, where they talk about why the Church of Christ is a cult. And if you want to see me talk about that a little bit, I just did a video on that. The link for that will be in the description. But here we have Jeremiah Nortier saying that we in Churches of Christ, we don't want to have anything to do with church history. And church history can be such a blessing, he says. And these Reformed Baptists, they love church history, but we don't. Let's see what else he has to say. And I want to point out major irony in the statement that he's making. I mean, major irony. That if you really did care about church history, you would not believe what these guys believe. And I will demonstrate that hopefully by the end of this video. Let's check it out.
And so my experience is when we do go to all the works of what Alexander Campbell, they want nothing to do with that at large. So it's interesting how we...
Pointing out Alexander Campbell because he's responsible largely for the proliferation of Churches of Christ in America, but definitely not the originator. I think that is a verifiable historical reality that people believed what brethren in Churches of Christ believed before Alexander Campbell ever came on the scene.
We've had some feedback on, a lot of historical points because in my conversations, I talk to a lot of solo scripturists, kind of this my Bible, me, under a tree, no creed but Christ mentality. And so a lot of my experience, Church of Christ don't want to talk about history at all. We understand the benefit with that. So I was encouraged just to see.
Well, I do want to talk about church history. And lately I have been talking more and more about church history, not because it is the end all be all, but it is because of my appreciation for church history that I am even more solidified in the fact that I cannot and will not be a Reformed Baptist. I will not be someone who particularly believes in Calvinism. I cannot do that because of church history, and here's what I mean. On such a critical issue, Calvinists have to run away from church history, and not only that, they have to condemn, basically, the vast majority of Christians who were alive in the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th centuries because of their belief that baptism is necessary to be regenerated, to be saved. This was the debate that happened recently between Joe Heschmeyer, who's a Catholic who believes that baptism saves, and a Calvinist, needgod.net. Check this out.
Is it your position that anyone who believes baptism saves will go to hell?
I believe if somebody is relying upon their baptism to get them into heaven and not therefore exclusively on what Christ did to save, then they wouldn't be saved.
Okay, so is it your position that the early Christians are all in hell?
No. I believe that
Can you harmonize those two?
God has preserved a remnant. I'd say
okay, who are some of the remnants
so
who believed what you believed?
So he's saying, if you believe that baptism saves, you're going to hell. And he says, what about the early Christians? Do you think that they're all in hell? Like all the earliest 1st, 2nd century Christians, that they're all in hell? And he's saying, no, God preserved a remnant. So he asks him now, who are the people? Name someone.
So I would say my faith is based on the earliest Christians, not just like the church fathers that people like to quote. I would say it's based on what the apostles taught. And so I would argue Paul, Peter, and all those apostles believe that it was faith, not baptism, that got them into heaven.
Okay, so they love church history, but they love, when it comes to the issue of baptism, they love only the apostles. And it's really, they just love Paul in Romans 4, not James and James 2.
Was there someone in the first 1,000 years after the apostles who was saved you could point to and you'd say, I think that person is going to heaven?
Well, I know that there was because God will.
Right, I know that they, obviously there must be, but it does seem like kind of a strike against your position if you can't find anyone, right?
Well, there are, I would say because it wasn't this major position in during different time periods, I would say that those who held a different position would have been suppressed and...
So he asked him, name one person like a church father who agreed with you, who had these Baptist Calvinistic views. Name one of them that agreed with you on the issue of baptism. And he says, I can't do it. He can't name anyone. And look at how this plays out. He tries to misquote a church father and try to make the quote extend out to something that the church father never really said.
Even
would that include the 100s?
Now, an example of that would be, so when Tertullian, he writes, when he holds on to the idea of baptism being a requirement, but he is arguing against people. We don't know their names, who they are. It doesn't list their names or anything, but he's talking about some people who say, look, well, Abraham got justified by faith without baptism, so therefore we mustn't need baptism to be saved. It should also be by faith. So we don't know who they are, but there's at least evidence of these people.
We literally know if those people were Christians as opposed to Gnostics or opponents of Christianity. Tertullian simply describes them as miscreants asking questions. He doesn't say there's this other group of Christians. He does not describe them as Christians at all.
So he's acting like there's a remnant that is being brought up by Tertullian here, and he's like, they're not even described as Christians. Tertullian doesn't say these are brethren or something like that.
But your assumption is they were Christians who were Baptists?
I would say that they were Christian. If they are holding on to sharing the faith of Abraham, then that would mean, to me, I would say they were Christian if they share the same faith as Abraham.
Well, okay. So just because they deny the sufficiency or the necessity of baptism, they deny that baptism saves. Well, actually, so to be clear, in chapter 13 of, I'm assuming that's what you're referring to, right? Chapter 13
Yes,
of De Baptismo? He says, here then those miscreants provoke questions. And so they say baptism is not necessary for them to whom faith is sufficient. So even in the objection being raised by these miscreants, whether Christian or not, we do not know. Like what else they believed about like the Trinity or Jesus' divinity, we know nothing. Only that they thought there was a group of people for whom baptism wasn't necessary. Now, your statement isn't that there's a group of people for whom baptism isn't necessary. Your statement, if I'm understanding you correctly, is that nobody needs to be baptized for salvation.
So this group is saying, well, these people that Tertullian is referencing are saying they believe that there are a group of people for whom baptism is not necessary, but not that baptism just universally is not necessary in order to be saved. So again, he's trying to quote a church father, and he's trying to make the church father say something that he absolutely did not say. Now, we're only 3.5 minutes into this cross-examination. Look how quickly he's about to abandon church history.
For salvation, just like keep it, other commands Jesus gives, they're not required for salvation. Right.
So it's not even clear to me that the miscreants, whether they're Christian or not, we don't know, believe the same thing you believe. And that's the closest you can find anyone who shares your faith.
But at least they are thinking that it's not requirement for salvation. Now, there are other people who you could quote who, like if you give an example, like Polycarp, we have one of his letters, and he doesn't in his letter mention baptism as being some sort of requirement for salvation. And so therefore, there are people who we may only have certain amount of information of, maybe certain documents. And
okay, so it sounds like you're just making the argument from silence. Like maybe the people who don't say anything about baptism were secretly Baptists.
That's exactly what he's doing. He's saying some people are doubting this, so therefore they're Calvinist Reformed Baptists.
And the thing is that I don't need to find people in history to say, look, this is my guy, that's my guy, that's my guy. I want to hold on to the faith taught by the apostles themselves, not taught by those later on who could go astray. It's possible they can go astray.
So look at that. We're having a debate on baptism here, and he's saying, I don't need to worry about church history. We don't need to talk about church history. Any quotes that I have don't really establish what I want them to establish. And really, it's because who cares about church history, right? It's just the Bible. Again, the claim that Calvinists make that like we in the Church of Christ, we want to run away from church history is a crazy claim to make. Again, if they mean by running away from church history, we want to run away from Alexander Campbell, that's silly. We don't need to run away from Alexander Campbell. He was not the head of the church or something like that. He was not some cult leader. There's no historical basis for something like that we all exist like in the same sense of Mormonism existing because of Alexander Campbell and they came around the same time. That is nonsense. Again, you can establish these beliefs existed before Alexander Campbell. And again, these beliefs are also held up by the history. Even if you just lay the scriptures aside, the plain, simple teaching of scriptures, they're held up by early church history, like this core belief in churches of Christ that baptism saves. It is for the remission of sins, and you need it to become a Christian. And so here we have a Reformed guy, a Calvinist, saying, no, I mean, I don't really need to care about church history. We don't need to talk about church history. I care only about what the apostles say. Again, run this back.
But baptism were secretly Baptists?
And the thing is that I don't need to find people in history to say, look, this is my guy, that's my guy, that's my guy. I want to hold on to the faith taught by the apostles themselves, not taught by those later on who could go astray. It's possible they can go astray.
I agree with him, by the way, that ultimately I hold up the Bible over church history. But Joe Heschmeyer is about to point out why it is so alarming that there is such a major gap of time that on such a critical issue, not some like side issue, not some very complicated, like really later on they started to try to reason through this issue, but on such a critical issue, nobody speaks what they speak.
Well, you're right, but it seems like if your position is the apostles taught baptism, and according to Ephesians, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, the early Christians seem to have gotten it, and none of the early Christians that we can find agree with you, doesn't that pretty resoundingly disprove your interpretation? Like if baptism is this basic thing the early Christians are getting right, which it seems to be, how is it your position that 100% of Christians who wrote about baptism got baptism wrong?
I would say that the truth will always be held onto by a minority, even in today's generation. It's a minority that does hold onto the truth, even amongst professing Christians today.
Again, he's saying on such a critical issue, the immediate Christians on such a critical issue, something that every Christian, every person that came to Christ would have done as a part of them coming to Christ, which is being baptized, that they all got it wrong. They all got it wrong because none of them speak what they speak, these people who came out of the Reformation, these Calvinists. It is really crazy, and we have to understand this. It is so crazy to make this claim that basically all of the earliest Christians are going to hell. All of the ones that you can name, they're all going to hell because they all believe that baptism saves. That is such a crazy claim to make. Again, the more that church history extends out, I get very skeptical about it, and I put less and less weight the more time has passed from the first century and onward in terms of what people believed. But when you look at the very earliest people who were the closest, it is very striking that they did believe that baptism saves. What is more likely? That they all instantly, all of them unanimously got it wrong, not like there was 50-50, not like there was a bunch of debate about it, but they all unanimously instantly got it wrong, or this was an established teaching that was given to them by the apostles that was being preserved in writing, and so therefore the earliest Christians all understood the truth about baptism, that you need that in order to become a Christian, and not it's like some ceremonial nice thing that you do as a Christian. What do you think? Let me know what you think about this. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, consider supporting on Patreon. I'm very curious to hear what you have to say. If you want to see the full extended version of this and every other video that I do, the link below is in Patreon. For as little as $5 a month, you can support the channel. Let me know what you think. I love you very much. Lord willing, I'll talk to you soon. Goodbye.